Hi everyone, my name's Levin Jones. I'm going to talk with you a minute about my public administrator interview with Mark Johnson. Mark is the planning director at the county I work at, which is Wilson County, North Carolina. Um, he is at the department head level position, so he sits in on department meetings and represents us with the county manager. His primary focuses are kind of upper management, budget related type items. Often, if he's coming down to talk to you, it is going to be a budgetary item that he wants to talk to you about. That being said, he also, while he does control our costs, he also is our advocate for items in the budget. He also, on top of our budget negotiations, primarily reviews all of our planning and zoning applications. So anytime we have new development that wants to start up, part of their review process is going to be submitting planning and zoning applications, and he'll be the main reviewer on those applications. He also administers the Unified Development Ordinances of Wilson County. He does have a planner under him that does the day-to-day enforcing of that, but he administers that program as well. Our planning department consists of three distinct units, those being planning, inspections, and transportation. The planning department is essentially just Mark as the planning director, and then he has a planner under him. Inspections has its own chief building inspector that runs that unit, and then there's two field inspectors in the unit and a permitting technician slash administrative assistant. And the final unit is the transportation department. That is a kind of quasi county position, as while they're employees, they aren't actually paid by the county, they're paid through the county. We have a transportation manager and then his administrative assistant, and then, depending on the time of year, between 10 and 15 drivers who drive vans for the county. These are actually all receive funds directly through federal grants, so it's kind of quasi-independent, but technically couched under the planning department, so it can be interesting the way that's organized. But largely, these three units are directly under him, and he reports between them and then the county manager's office. His probably his most visible function is has to do with the planning board. So the planning board for our county is a board of officials who are citizens and have taken an interest in directing the planning and development in Wilson County. Mark, being the chief planner, advises that board as it makes its decisions about different land use issues that come before it. So the road to becoming the planning director started for Mark, very early on. He was a native of Greenville, and when he graduated from high school, went to East Carolina University to get a BA in their urban planning department with a minor in sociology. He continued on to get his master's in geology with a concentration in urban planning while he was there. He also met his wife, and when they graduated, they got married and moved down to Wilmington, North Carolina, where her family was from. And he took a position with the city of Wilmington as a code enforcement officer. As he progressed through that code enforcement officer training, the largest piece that he did was get a certification as a CZO, a certified zoning official. That involves taking some classes through the UNC School of Government. That was kind of his first 2 years, and then The next 2 years, he worked on getting his AICP certification, which is the American Institute of Certified Planners. These are basically just professional organizations that kind of are gatekeepers for different levels of planning progression. So what is a planning director? It's hard to define. They're a very responsible position. It sounds very responsible. What are you planning? Most of these things are going to be construction projects. You think of blueprints and things like that, but in today's society, it extends to planning transportation services. It can mean planning water services, electrical services. There's all kinds of things that have to be planned that involve human-built infrastructure. Mark, specifically working in a rural area, has a lot of rural land use issues that come before him. Probably the predominant one is going to be floodplain issues. So we have large areas of farmland throughout the county, and so as far as use goes, as farmland, it is free and clear to be used, but once you start going from a farm to any kind of structure, that's when things have to be evaluated for floodplain elevations. So that's a large part of his day-to-day job is evaluating floodplain issues. He's also, as the code ordinance administrator, responsible for administering the Unified Development Ordinance of Wilson County. In addition to these development needs, probably at least in his mind, the largest thing he has to do is make sure there are correct people in all the positions in his departments. So he's of the opinion in the school of thought that departments will largely manage themselves as long as effective people are in all the positions. So that being said, a lot of emphasis is put up front on finding and hiring the right people, and then also on continuing education, training people to be even better at the jobs that they do. A good thing about having him as our department head is he is, because he does put effective people into those positions, he has the ability to be available to any of us as individuals. He makes it known that it is a genuine open door policy. So going back to some of what we were talking about earlier about budgeting issues that the planning director looks at. Recent years, everyone's been very concerned with budgets, mostly trying to reduce them, taxes being too high, things of this nature. We're trying to cut corners. So a lot of what directors, and this isn't just a planning director thing, this is all department directors, a large focus is placed on trying to find cost-cutting measures. So there's pressure from the top down to find ways of cutting costs. And then conversely, there's pressure from the bottom up, pressuring the department heads to advocate for better pay for their employees. So there's a balancing act there when it comes to budgetary matters. There's also reports that need to be prepared. These are largely financial reports for most of our departmental managers. Mark specifically has some additional reports that he has to generate regarding demographic and census data. And that's mostly pulled from permitting reports that are generated from the inspections department. Some other important roles, talking to vendors who perform work for the county. So obviously we've got to constantly maintain those contracts that we have with our third-party vendors. As our zoning enforcement officer, he's got to enforce all of our land use regulations along with our planner. To close the interview, I asked Mark if he would describe himself as a public administrator. He said that he didn't. And that's largely because of the way that he came up in the profession. His bachelor and master's degrees are in planning. He's been involved in the planning sphere his entire professional career, basically, attending planning conferences. And so because of all that experience, he strongly identifies with being a planner and considers himself just the facilitator of all the other functions that have to be done. He doesn't consider himself an overall administrator of those things. Those individual units administer themselves. And the quote here for you is, once you have the right people in place, departments can run themselves.